Good morning. Oh, that's loud. New Cumberland, I have to talk loud because the mic doesn't do much, but here I'll have to try and tone it down a little bit. So Brian's out of town, and I appreciate Arnold and Gary and Brian thinking of me to fill in while he's out. I'm not going to be picking up with Brian's class from Wednesday night. I talked to him, and it was easier for me to just kind of prepare my own notes and material instead of trying to put together the class. And I've been working on something over the last, I don't know, let's say since late July last year. How about that? And it was something that is I went through and look back, and for those of you who don't know, late July is when my dad passed. And it's something that as I went through and looking back at his life, I looked at, and at his funeral when I spoke, we talked about a legacy of love. And so what I want to do this morning, and this the class is intended to be interactive. So the first question that I'm going to ask you is, and I don't want necessarily just the biblical definition, but when somebody says the word love to you, what's the first thing that comes to mind? God, complete. What else? Marriage, serving. What else? Caring, family. Right? All these things are part of love, and we're right. God's love is complete. What I want us to look at this morning, and then we'll go into the sermon, we'll pick right up off of what we're going to look at this morning, is in the Bible, there are basically four types of love that are referred to. The first two, not that much, but it's important to know that they're there. So the first type of love, or that's mentioned in the Greek, is eros. When I say that word, what do you think? We have a word that comes from eros. It's okay to say it. Erotic, right? That's the type of love, that is one of the types of love that's mentioned in the Bible. It's not a bad word. It's intended to be a type of love, but where is that love intended to live? In marriage, not outside of marriage, correct? If you would turn to Proverbs 5. I'm not as good at this technology stuff as Brian is, but I couldn't read my Bible this morning, so I had to punt and go with the Kindle. Proverbs 5, starting in verse 18, verses 18 and 19 say, "Let thy fountain be blessed, and rejoice with the wife of thy youth. Let her be as the loving hind and pleasant roe. Let her breast satisfy thee at all times, and be thou ravished always with her love." Now, there are some different translations that will use a few different words, but the point is that this type of love is something that's brought up. Now, the only place that we actually see the word eros used is in the Song of Solomon, which, if you've read through it, is all about that type of love that we see in through there. But Hebrews 13 and 4 tells us that the marriage bed is to be honorable. It's something that's important. So one thing as we kind of go through this that I want us to look at is how all of these types of love impact every aspect of our lives. And as we go through, I want you to think about how they impact a marriage. And maybe we'll see that the institution of marriage that was created by God is actually much more important to learning how to live our lives with the appropriate types of love that God intended us to have. We can see here eros is definitely a part of marriage. It's what attracts two people together. It's what keeps two people together in that sense. And it's something that is to be shared solely between husband and wife. That's the intent. It's what binds a husband and wife together. It's what makes them one. The second type of love is storge. And I may say these wrong, but I did look up the pronunciations. So that's how it's said. Now, this word describes family love. And this is the love that we see between father and mother, parents and siblings, aunts and uncles, grandparents and grandchildren, those sorts of things. The exact term is not mentioned in the Bible, either in the Old Testament or the New Testament. But there are two instances where it is. And this is the type of love that just, I want to say, just happens. And I almost 5 months ago, this little one came in, and a lot of you are grandparents, and you had your own children. When did you fall in love with your children? When they were born, or was it before? You loved them when you, ladies, when did you love them? When you were carrying them, didn't you? When you found out, fathers, that your wife was expecting, did you fall in love with your child? It's okay to say yes. It's the modern world now. Guys are allowed to say they love things. That's when we fell in love. I fell in love with her when I found out. But when she was born, she's like my own. I didn't have to learn to love her. I did not have to learn to love my children. It's a natural affection that is created through this process. Again, look at where we're coming from. This eros type of love that's created within the marriage relationship ultimately leads to the next type, which is the family love. Husband and wife, father and mother come together, have a child. That love is carried forward to that child. The second you find out that natural affection, that care that you have is immediate. You love the child. You may not know boy or girl, what it's going to look like, any of that, but you love the child. You don't have a name yet, probably, but you still love the child. That's why they end up with names like Blueberry and things like that, because nobody knows what to call them, so they come up with names. But there's still love there. And it's this family type of love that's storge. It's what creates that natural affection to raise your children. And it's a love that you're not going to be able to measure. You can't imagine what that love is unless you've been through it. Unless you've had your own children, you don't know what that care and love is. Now, you can understand it between family members and it works that way, but it's in I use the childbearing experience to show that it's a natural affection. It's something that's automatically created. When you marry into a family, you get what? In-laws, right? Now, if you're a comedian, those two words hyphenated together is the butt of just about every joke you can come up with. But as a rule, when you marry into a family, what happens? You become part of a bigger family. And a son or a daughter ends up with two sets of parents. There's a natural affection. My child has found someone that he or she loves. I care about my child. I care about that person. And it becomes automatic. There's just a natural tendency, a natural affection that just extends to the next place. It's the same thing with aunts and uncles and cousins. Put a bunch of family members in a room that haven't necessarily met, but have something in common. What happens? They all tend to just get along. There's a natural affection. There's a natural connection there that exists. Now, the only two times that the word storge is mentioned in the Bible is first in Romans 1:31, and it's not the exact term. The term is actually astorgos, which means without love or devoid of affection. And so if you look at Romans 1:31, you're going to see the phrase without natural affection. Can you imagine hearing, ladies, that you're pregnant with a child and you just don't care about it? We can't fathom that concept in general. It doesn't make sense to us because it goes against what the natural order is. Now that doesn't mean that you're not scared to death if it's your first one and you're not sure and those things override, but you're still not having that natural affection kind of goes against. And that's what is mentioned here. It's also mentioned again in 2 Timothy 3:3, that same phrase, without natural affection. The other place that it's mentioned is in Romans 12:10, and this is a compound version of storge, which is philostorgis, which is actually going to take us into the next type of love. But this is a phrase that's interpreted as loving dearly, being affectionate, loving in a way characteristic of a family. So philostorgis is that type of natural affection that we have for family. So the phrase philo would tell us what? That's the next type of love, which is phileo, philia. It's affection. It's that brotherly love that we have, right? So in Hebrews 13:1, if you'll turn over there, Hebrews 13:1 simply says, "Let brotherly love continue." Very simple. In 1 Thessalonians 4 and verse 9, it says, "But as touching brotherly love, ye need not that I write unto you, for ye yourselves are taught of God to love one another." So, what is this brotherly love? What do we know about it? Like, if you guys don't talk, I'm going to finish really early. I have this paced. It's the love that we're supposed to express to everyone, not literally just our brother. It goes to our brother, but it's intended more to which type of family? Our Christian family. What about outside our Christian family? Yes. So it is the most general form of love referred to in the Bible. It is the most common type of love that you will see referred to throughout the Bible. It means a close friendship or brotherly love. We refer to it as brotherly love, but it's not literally, hey, there's my brother, I love him. That's that. That's the storge, that family love that we have. The concept of brotherly love or brotherly affection, this is unique to Christianity. You won't find it in other religions. And I use Christianity in the very broad term, not just Church of Christ. But Christianity in general, this is something that's taught throughout those religions. Here it is. It's the concept is something that we only see there, and it's because even though we're not members of a conventional family, we think of ourselves as a society of God's family. So if you ask people out in the world, are you a member of God's family? And they go, regardless of what denomination or church they attend, they'll likely say yes. And so if they do, that's that phileo type of love that you're seeing. This is the expression of love that is intended to, if we live it correctly, is intended to make people curious, to draw them to God's family. It's how our example reaches out to the world to say, come and see what we have. You want to be a part of this. Come and join this. See this type of love, this and caring, this affection that we see for people. Now, the Eros type of love, that happens between a husband and wife, and that is something, it's going to happen. It's not necessarily something you learn, right? Storge, as we've covered it, this isn't necessarily something that you learn. You may have to learn how to take care of them, but in general, this type of love that you see in the family just naturally happens. That's why we use the word natural affection or without natural affection. But this phileo or philia, is that a natural love? Isn't it something that we have to learn? Something that we have to develop? Something that we have to grow? Something that we have to practice, right? Right. Right. So it's a love that cares for the person, as you'll hear sometimes, as you mentioned, soldiers, when they're out there, they're worried about the guy next to them. And the expectation is that the guy next to them is worried about them. There's that protection in that foxhole. Doesn't matter whether you like them or not. They may not be your favorite person in the world out of there, but in that foxhole, in that situation, it matters. And so there's that caring and things. But it's something that has to be learned. It is not something that just comes naturally. If your neighbor builds his fence on your land, what's your natural inclination? It's a big deal. But brotherly love tells you how to resolve it without, it's not telling you not to resolve a potential issue, but it is telling you how to handle it. You're not to go out and start the neighborhood war. You don't go out and do something to his yard because they did something to yours. You don't create this battle or this tension that we tend to hear about a lot of times in these situations. We handle it differently and appropriately based on the type of love that we are supposed to have as Christians. What does God tell us to do with our enemies? Love them. How do you love your enemy? It's not an easy thing to do, is it? Because our natural inclination, when somebody does something to us, how do we want to react? Retaliate. There's another R word, revenge, right? A lot of times it's like, okay, I'm going to one up what you did to me. And that's the wrong direction. We see Jesus says to do what? Turn the other cheek, right? What, does that mean literally turn and let the guy punch you on the other side? Or does it mean that we're supposed to look at the situation and we don't retaliate with the same type of violence or the same type of thing that they're doing? If we retaliate or seek that type of revenge, are we showing the brotherly love that we're instructed to show? No.
Us when we were lost in sin, and he loved us though we were unlovable, and we have to times love those who are unlovable.
And so God's love is, in that situation, what? Unconditional, right? So our love for our neighbor, our love for our enemy involves what? No conditions. There's no conditions on my love for my neighbor, my love for my coworker, my care for the guy that drove down the street too fast. All of these things. One of the things that as we go through this, I want us to think, and we'll get into it more in the sermon, but I want us to think about this not necessarily as, we'll see some biblical examples of how it was handled and so on. But at the same time, I want us to think about us today. As we go through this, I want you to think specifically about how does this impact me in my life? Do I see these 4 stages of love in my life? Is my relationship with my husband and wife, is that the appropriate type of love? Is my relationship within my family the appropriate type of love? Are you one of those in-laws that's the butt of every comedian's joke? Or are you not? As a parent, are you showing, is your love that natural affection, or is it not? When we get to this brotherly love, do we have that? Do people see that in my life? One example, I used to, when we lived in California, to get to any of the restaurants from the office building that I was in, I always had to walk across this park. Well, if you're in LA and there's a park, guess who's living in it? Homeless people, or people looking for a handout. And I guarantee you, every day I walked through this park, somebody would come up and ask for money or approach you. How do you react to that? I know how I reacted to it. Sometimes I reacted poorly and went the other direction. It's like, oh, I see that guy over there. He's going to try and come and talk to me. I'm going to walk over here and go the long way so I don't have to deal with him. Is that how we're supposed to react? Do we try and get away from it? Or, I'm not saying we should go necessarily looking for it, but how do we react when that person does approach us? How do we behave? Those are questions that you have to answer, not me. So as we go through this, I want you to be thinking about this question. How do I love? How do I love? Do I have this type of love in my life? Am I following through with this type of love? The last type of love, oh yeah, it looks like I'll make it, is agape. Now that's the one that we tend to hear the most about. That when you hear sermons, you hear that word agape. And this is the highest type of love that's mentioned in the Bible. Turn to 1 Corinthians chapter 16 and verse 14. Let all things be done with charity. John 3:16. I shouldn't have to turn over there. For God so loved the world that what? He gave His only begotten Son, that whosoever, right? Did God have to do that? Who were we to God? Sinners. Were we, at this point in time, any better than the Jews or the Pharisees and the Sadducees that did not believe in Him? No. Did God send Jesus to die for just those Jews who believed? Just those Jews who got it? No. He sent Jesus to die for everyone. Unconditionally, nothing. He knew it. What about Jesus? I want you to think about Jesus and his life. First, just focus on his life on earth. When did Jesus figure out who he was? When did he know who he was? In the beginning, always, right? It's not like he was born and somewhere around, age 12 or 13, he decided, hey, I'm going to be the Messiah. Or look at these powers I have. I must be the Messiah. Didn't work that way. Jesus always knew who he was. From a young man, he knew what his lot in life was. We talk about sometimes, and we focus on those 3 years of his ministry and his teaching, and he knew what was coming. I would argue that for the first 33 years, the whole time he was here, he knew what he was going to have to do. Can you imagine? Just think about it for 3 years, knowing that you were going to die. Forget knowing how, just knowing that 3 years from now, at this point in the future, I'm going to die and there's nothing I can do about it. In fact, I'm going to do it for these people who want to kill me now. They don't believe in me. Look at all the things that I've done, all the people that I've healed, and they don't care. In fact, I raised Lazarus from the dead, one of my best friends. And what do they want? They want to kill me. How can they not see God's power in what I just did? Did that change Jesus' mind? In the garden, when Jesus is praying to God, sweat dripping like blood, what does he say? Thy will be done. Agape is a selfless, sacrificial, unconditional love that is expressed to us by God. We say, and there's the verse, God is love. This is the type of love that God is. This is that agape. It's selfless. God created us, and then we turn our backs on Him. If your children, you raise them up, and then they turn their backs on you and walk away and never have anything to do with you, are you okay with that? In our society, they turn 18 and we just kick them out, kick them to the curb, right? I don't know about any of you, but I still have kids living with me. And I'm not sure they're ever leaving. But I'm okay with that to a point. Right? Because why? Because my love isn't conditional through those first 18 years. My care for them is unconditional. No matter where they're at, what their lot in life is, what they're doing, anything else, I'm always going to be their father. Dad was always, without a doubt, my father. Now, that relationship changed as I got older and got married and had kids of my own and so on. But at the end of the day, when something happens in our family, if it was one of us boys and it had to do with certain things, there was only one place all four of us were going. And that was to him. Now, if it was a medical question, we went to Mom. But why would we do that? Why would we turn and just automatically go directly to our parents? What was their love for us? Unconditional. It's a far-fetched example for you. But I want you to think about it. Your son or your daughter commits murder. Do you approve of it? No. Do you still love them? You may not understand what they did, but at the end of the day, there's going to be a point in time where at some point you're going to say, but they're still my child. Aren't you? I think I would. At a point in time, I'm not going to be happy about it. And trust me, I did a lot of things that Dad wasn't happy about, and he told me about it. But I always knew one thing, that I was still his son. And when I needed him, he was going to be there. God is no different for us. When we need him, he's going to be there. Turn to 1 John chapter 3 in verse 16. It says, "Hereby perceive we the love of God, because he laid down his life for us, and we ought to lay down our lives for our brethren." We're going to look more into what this actually means when we get into the sermon. But God laid down his life for us, so we are to lay down ours for others. Now, I will tell you right now, that does not mean that if you're literally supposed to lay down your life. This isn't about you getting into a situation where somebody else's life is threatened and you step into that role. The chances that that's actually going to happen in anybody's lives is so remote, it's not even worth discussing. But as we get into the lesson this morning, I want you to we'll see what that is. Anders Nygren wrote, "Agape love is unmotivated in the sense that it is not contingent on any value or worth in the object of love. It is spontaneous and heedless, for it does not determine beforehand whether love will be effective or appropriate in any particular case." In other words, there's no contingency. There's nothing that rides on that. The love is automatic. It just is. God doesn't love us because we love him. God loved us before we loved him. God loves us even though we've turned our backs on him. But what does that love mean? Does that love automatically mean we're going to heaven? No, it doesn't, does it? There are rules. There are things that we have to do. But God's love, don't confuse God's love and the reward that we get for living a life according to his word. God loves us, period, to obtain the rewards that he's offered, to obtain heaven, to obtain the peace that we can have in our lives. And all those things, those blessings, there are some things that we have to do. We have to love with this kind of love. Turn back to the book of John. We'll look real quick at just three quick examples, three quick verses. We'll start in John chapter 13 and verse 35. It says, "By this shall all men know that ye are my disciples, if ye have love one to another." And then jump forward to chapter 14 and verse 21. "He that hath my commandments and keepeth them, he it is that loveth me. And he that loveth me shall be loved of my Father, and I will love him, and will manifest myself to him." And then forward in John chapter 17 and verse 23. "I in them, and thou in me, that they may be made perfect in one, and that the world may know that thou hast sent me, and hast loved them as thou hast loved me." That verse tells us that this love draws people to God. It doesn't make sense. It's a love that just doesn't make sense. What do you mean you love me? I just did this. I don't remember his name, but everybody knows about the mass shooting that occurred in the church in, I believe it was North Carolina a couple of years ago. One of those kids, one of those women that were shot was the mother of a high school baseball player, teenager. He was actually just drafted by the New York Mets, I believe. Pretty good. He was at a game that night when this happened. His mother was killed. And I should have pulled it up. But the very next day, less than 24 hours later, he's at the baseball field speaking to reporters and all these people who are waiting for him to tell them how he feels and what he thinks and how are you going to react. And I guarantee you that every single person there wanted to hear him lash out at this kid who went into this church and shot his mother and all of her friends and the people that went there. This kid who wasn't even 18 years old, a teenager that we would not even consider an adult, basically said, I will handle this the way my mother handled her life. I will forgive him. Did not hold it against him. If you go a couple of days later to the courtroom, you saw the same reaction from those people. All those people that went to this congregation, to a person, had an attitude of forgiveness towards this kid. Doesn't mean that they were ever going to forget what happened. But imagine that love. You just killed my mother. And he doesn't have an attitude of anger, vengeance, or anything else. He has an attitude of forgiveness. That is agape love. I never turned any of the slides on either.